kind. My name is Damian Hoskins, Executive Director of Elements, and I am a few things I think that are relevant here. I'm a father of 4 beautiful children, 2 girls, 2 boys. I have a grandson. Actually, that's not true. So I recently got remarried, so I have 6 kids. So I have 2 bonus daughters, and I'm a bonus grandson. So all of that makes me think very, very intentionally about removing the barriers that help young people thrive. I'm also a 15-year teaching veteran. I taught middle school for 13 years on purpose. And as was mentioned, I also have been teaching the last couple of years at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, with a particular focus on hip-hop studies, which is really central to the work that I do currently. So we, at Elements, we work in this environment to help promote young people thriving. We are one of many organizations, much like the ones that you all are a part of, in this broader network to advocate for the health and well-being of young people. But I have a problem, and so I only got about 15 minutes, but I typically get really passionate about stuff like this, and I kind of go off script. And I have a script in front of me, and I'm trying to keep to it, but it's going to be really, really hard, because this stuff really, really, I guess, ignites my passion, no pun intended. I've never known a child to traumatize themselves. Just sit with that for a moment. That ultimately means that whatever trauma and issues and challenges of any young people that we all serve, the 66,000 that are in this community, whichever problems they face, was either a direct result by omission or commission of some adult. So there's a level of accountability before we begin to directly problem solve that I think that many of us have to be able to accept. That we are either a part or complicit in a system, or we know people, or we have somehow allowed for these systems to develop, exist, and make these lives challenging for the young people that we serve. That, any kids in front, that pisses me off. Right? So, let me get back on script before I go crazy. Now my technology won't work. Pardon me. Before I start flipping through these slides here, I do believe that no problem can be solved until we get to the root cause of that problem. Otherwise, we'll be creating solutions for symptoms. Right? So imagine having COVID and somebody telling you, just blow your nose. It won't solve the problem. It'll give the impression that something is being done, but make no mistake, movement is not the same as progress. Hamsters move on hamster wheels. They ain't going nowhere, right? So we have to be very, very intentional about the work that we do so that these solutions that we create are sustainable, but they also take into account the root cause of the problems that the young people that we serve are ultimately facing. All of those issues that Susan brought up are part of a network of systems. And again, not a single solitary child created that system. But you do have kids who cannot think in school because they did not eat that morning, right? And that was a part of a system or a systemic issue that they had no hand in creating. And I think that ultimately ends up being the result of the things that we prioritize or don't prioritize. Let me tell you a really quick funny story that talks about the prioritization, particularly of adults. I was driving, maybe you guys can experience this as well. I was driving, I was behind someone at a stoplight. The light was red, but then it eventually turned green, and that person did not go. I'm a very impatient driver, so I'm honking on the horn. And that person said to me, rolled down her window, and said, "I am on the phone." She was clearly not prioritizing anyone else but her own thinking, her own circumstances, her own issues, right? I think that's what is at the core of some of these systemic problems. These policies, these situations, these circumstances that are in place, the young people that we serve, people have not prioritized the young people. They've prioritized their own individual agendas, what's important to them. All right, now I'm kidding. This is really, really important. So the work that we do at Elements, we are designed, excuse me, my phone is ringing, which is absolutely embarrassing. I apologize. We at Elements, we are committed to exposing the young people we serve to college and career pathways in the creative fields. We leverage hip hop culture to do so, but please, I want to make a couple of distinctions. What you probably think you know about hip hop culture is not hip hop culture. What you probably have experienced historically is the commercialization of rap music. That is not hip hop culture. Please know that rapping is something you do, culture is something you live. And hip hop culture is entrenched in a whole host of different things, which actually are really aligned to some of the things that we try to support young people with through social emotional learning, which includes grit, resiliency, determination, overcoming obstacles and systems that you did not create. Hip hop is really well known for that. But the things that you guys hear on the radio, that's just a proliferation of rap music that is, profitable to someone, but not necessarily endemic of the culture. So that's an important understanding. This particular poem is one that really sort of drives some of the thinking around the work that we do with Elements. It's a poem called Harlem. It's written by Langston Hughes during the Harlem Renaissance. The poem goes, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sword and then run? Does it stake like rotten meat or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? And the question itself is, what happens to a dream that a young person puts off or is forced to put off? Young people are a cacophony of potential and dreams. And then they get acclimated to systems that get them to focus on things that put their dreams aside. That is not their fault, and ultimately ends up being their responsibilities though. And sometimes they forego what they dream to be for what is currently in their realities, right? And what we're hoping to do is unscramble those eggs. It's very, very hard. It's virtually impossible to unscramble eggs. But at the end of the day, if we can look at what most people are calling systems change, which I don't really believe in, I believe in new systems creation. The system is not broken, you all know that. It's beneficial to the people who created the system, right? Racism is profitable to somebody, otherwise it wouldn't exist, right? So it's not a matter of, in my opinion, trying to deconstruct a system that people are profiting from. It's actually a matter of recreating a new system, which actually is a lot faster. However, it's still the same length of time, and it's still that much of an arduous task. But we don't have to rely on the guilt or people trying to reprioritize in a way that's completely inauthentic and disingenuous. We can just begin, like much of what we're doing right now. But this poem, the poem Harlem, actually helps ground the work that we do. Because under no circumstances do we want any of the kids that we serve to defer their dreams for anything that some adult tells them is much more practical. Picasso said that every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. I'd imagine that because we all in this classroom, I used to be a teacher, my bad. We all in this room were once children. There's probably a good chance that some of us in this room have experienced some of the same traumas that we are trying to eliminate. Imagine that. So then that means that you are subject matter experts in trying to address those issues. But all of us, in many instances, not all of us, some of us, in many instances, have forego or have put our dreams aside or deferred our dreams because of something that a system told us that we should do. And I think we're probably sort of reconnecting to this work because we do not want that to happen to the next generation, right? And so hopefully as we grow up, we can also reconnect to the things that made us dream as children so that we can be subject matter experts on what it feels like for these things to actually come to fruition as well. This is how we do it at Elements. We operate on the premise of what we call the exposure quotient. It is actually not something that we created. I had the wonderful opportunity to be mentored by a gentleman named Dr. Obadiah Williams, who has since passed, but was a wonderful educator in Cincinnati. And I was teaching at a school that he was doing reading instruction in, and I was struggling. It was in the early part of my career, I was struggling. He said two things that are really important to me. The very first thing he said to me was, young man, no child cares how much you know until they know how much you care. The first thing. And when he said that, first I was standing up. When he said that, I sat down. I was like, this man got something to say. So then I sat down and he got to the whiteboard and he wrote this down. And this is the exposure quotient. And it goes GQ plus EQ equals DQ equals IQ. Now we all know what IQ is. IQ is your intelligence quotient. What this thing suggests is that your GQ, which is your genetic quotient, assuming that you're born with the activity of your limbs and cognitive strengths, that plus your EQ, which is the things that you are exposed to, that is your exposure quotient, will equal your DQ or your desire quotient. And that will equal or inform your intelligence quotient. So your genetic quotient plus your exposure quotient will equal your desire quotient, and that will equal or inform your intelligence quotient. The problem with this equation is that it is agnostic. It does not matter what a child is exposed to. That will inform what they desire. Good, bad, or indifferent. So we have the responsibility as adults to control the exposures. I have seen some very, very intelligent criminals. Many of them I grew up with. A couple of them were in my family. True story. Because that's what they were exposed to at a very pivotal point in their lives. But what happens if we change that exposure to be something that is content rich, culturally rich, artistically rich, scientifically rich? It doesn't really matter. But something that we know will inform a better opportunity for them to thrive, and where they don't have to make the gamble on living or dying or being free or incarcerated, right? If we can control that exposure piece, then we can basically direct a child towards the things that they can desire, and that will inform more of their intelligences. This is what happened with hip hop culture. On August 11th, 1973, was the year I was born, hip hop was born at 1520 Cedric Avenue in the Bronx. A Jamaican immigrant named Clyde Campbell, who was better known as DJ Kool Herc, threw a back to school party for his little sister Cindy. And at that back to school party, that's where hip hop was created. He devised this very interesting and intricate way of making sure that the kids had an opportunity to dance longer, right? And the way that he did that was I'm old. The way he did that was he took two records, two of the same records, and put it on two different turntables. And if you know anything about vinyl records, you look on the record and you can see the grooves on the record. The darkest grooves represent the longest drum beats on a record. So he took two of the same records, and basically what he did was something that he called the merry-go-round. He put the needle on the record on the break part of the beat, the drum heavy part of the beat, and then basically just transferred the sound from one record to the next to extend that break, right? And extending that break gave kids a much longer opportunity to dance on the break, which was the invention of break dancing. It's actually how breakdancing started. They got way more creative after that, but that was the inception of it. But this was this kind of ingenuity, and the reason that this becomes important and really relevant to this particular conversation is that they did it despite the fact that the housing projects that most of them lived in were being burned down for insurance money. New York City was bankrupt at the time. It wasn't the Manhattan or boroughs that we know of today. It was really bankrupt. There was corrupt politicians and things of that sort. The system was broken. And the kids that created hip hop culture were a product of that system. Oddly enough, they were very, very resilient without having to be instructed or informed about their resiliency. They wanted to create something. Most kids are intrinsically creative problem solvers, right? And so because of what they were experiencing and what they wanted to experience, they did something which is pretty astronomical, but they used and leveraged what they had at their disposal. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't even paying attention. They used and leveraged what they had at their disposal. I gotta wrap up, I'm sorry. They used what they had at what was at their disposal to create this multi-billion-dollar global industry. I want to go back really quickly just so you can see that when we talked about the genetic quotient, how far upstream we actually have to go to make sure that these exposures remain cemented and anchored in the lives of the kids that we serve. But it is not just a singular situation, as trauma is not a singular, isolated experience, right? And most kids carry trauma physiologically, right? But it's never really just one thing that they experience that make them have a traumatic experience. It's typically a compound sort of a situation. Let me wrap up. I can get it really long-winded. Our Creative Futures Initiative is designed to do that. I explained that a little bit earlier, but our Creative Futures Initiative is really sort of cemented in the idea that if we can control those exposures, we can make sure that the young people that we serve become the next generation of creative problem solvers. This is just data about the kids that we've reached, the partnerships that we've had. Hopefully we can call some of you partners as we move along, so if those opportunities seem right and your organization would benefit from this kind of programming, or we can collaborate in any way, just let me know. But one of the things I want to make sure that you guys recognize is ArtsWave, who's the region's largest funder, did a study just recently, and over the last 4 years have been $1.6 billion of economic activity in the arts, right? What I want to make sure is that I'll say it this way in the affirmative, I want to make sure that the young people that we serve, which is historically Black and brown kids, have access to these creative futures, right? Because historically, 85% of those people who benefited from this economic mobility has not been Black and brown kids. And if like I said, I taught school for 13 years, and whenever I would ask a kid what they wanted to be, nobody ever said they wanted to be a lighting engineer, or a sound engineer, or a culinary artist, or a fashion designer. They said one of 5 things: doctor, lawyer, athlete, entertainer, or a barber, or beautician. But that's all that they were exposed to. That's all they saw as potential career pathways. But the moment we change what they're exposed to is the moment that we can change how they see themselves in the world, and ultimately change for us as a community, as a region, as a city. We can foster in the next generation of creative problem solvers that will be leading our city and our region. I think that's I should probably shut up now. Am I out of time? I'm out of time. Yeah, way longer than I'm very sorry. I will, just imparting really quickly. These are individuals who are perfect representations of what we try to show our young people that they can be. Ava DuVernay is a award-winning film director. She started off as a rapper. Very few people know that. Damian was dyslexic and impoverished, and started a clothing brand called FUBU, which is a multi-million. He's on Shark Tank and all that stuff. He started it at his mother's kitchen table while he was waiting tables at Red Lobster. The rapper Nas, at the very end, grew up in completely impoverished situations. However, he was one of the first investors in ring technology. and turned $4 million into $400 million from that investment alone. You guys know Lin-Manuel Miranda. Hamilton is basically a hip hop history lesson. Right next to him is a guy named Steve Stout. That's a very long story, I won't go into Steve Stout. Next to Neil deGrasse Tyson is a guy named Gary Earl Grice. He is one of the founding members of the Wu-Tang Clan, and he's also a professor in quantum physics. Yeah, and then you have Avery Walker here, who's a fashion designer and an icon and a tastemaker. These are all representatives of individuals that our young people can look at as examples and models of what they can aspire to be. Thanks.